to like what they heard. And Nathan Dean is able to check a couple of boxes here on some outstanding issues that we've been talking about for months. Of course, senior U.S. policy analyst here at Bloomberg Intelligence and with us back at the table. We missed you last week and good to see you. So he finally came out with it. Basel III, what did we learn?
Yeah, so Jerome Powell actually came out and said today that the Fed's view is that broader material changes, that they have come to an agreement or are very close to coming to an agreement with the FDIC and the OCC on what that means.
Yeah.
He wouldn't give us the specifics of that, but he also said that those broader material changes warrant a reproposal. Now, this has been the big question up in New York with the Wall Street banks. Were they going to try and finalize it this year? They had said that they were going to try, but because Jerome Powell came out and said that the reproposal is in the cards, that means finalization is not going to happen in 2024. It most likely will get pushed back to 2025. Implementation of this will probably now begin July 1st, 2026. That's me speculating. But ultimately, it also means that this is at the whim of the U.S. elections.
yeah.
And if President Trump wins, new regulatory leadership next year may just say, we're just going to pause on this for now.
So what do investors think? And I'm sure you're hearing from them this morning that we're just going to kind of forget about this for a while.
So there's two ways to think about this. I think the banks themselves very much suspected that a reproposal was in the cards. So I don't think that they were actually going to be somewhat surprised, but it's nice to have that clarity from Jerome Powell and that the reproposal is coming. The other way to think about it is that, it takes a long time for capital to build. And so it's not like these banks are going to be able to say that July 21st or July 1st, 2026, that they're going to start doing this. But, the reproposal gives them a little bit more of a win in terms of the overall capital increase. Under the proposal as written right now, if you're a bank like Bank of America or JP Morgan, you were going to see a 19% increase in capital. Our view, and this is the House BI view, is that under this reproposal, you're going to see somewhere around 7 to 10%.
Okay.
Jerome Powell also insinuated that there could be some regional bank relief there on a separate question with Senator Britt about long-term debt requirements. He actually insinuated that it would be in line with a bill called S2155. The reason why I'm saying this is that regional banks under the Basel III endgame it kicks in if you're 100 billion in assets are up.
Yeah.
That S2155 actually is 250 billion.
Wow.
So don't be surprised. That's just something we're trying to read the tea leaves of whether or not
I love this.
some of those smaller regional banks could actually get some even bigger relief.
Incredible. Well, I mean, the stocks are moving here, right? The banking ETF KBW is up 1.5%. JP Morgan's up 2%. They're going to be reporting earnings later this week. That's going to be an interesting conference call now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the question will go from the Basel III endgame because they get more time to breathe here. And then it moves to general election uncertainty. Just what is it going to happen? Because, there's also a question from Senator Reid, though, of how does the Federal Reserve play in this new world where the Supreme Court has, thrown out the Chevron deference. There's a major questions ruling.
Yeah.
And Jerome Powell essentially just said, look, it's way too soon, but we follow the law. Now, I think when it comes to the financial regulators, they really don't, for the last 5 or 6 years, Chevron hasn't been an important part of their theory here.
Yeah, right.
But, in this world, the Basel III endgame, as they move through this process, and this is why I think Jerome Powell is insisting on a reproposal here, is that if they don't do it right through this procedure called the Administrative Procedure Act, if they don't get this process right, the courts are going to throw it out for them.
Oh, boy. Fascinating analysis here from Nathan Dean as we try to pick through the tea leaves here. The breadcrumbs, as I said earlier, left by Jay Powell. We heard a lot about Fed independence today from Republicans, too. Bill Hagerty, who comes on the air and criticizes Joe Biden severely from time to time. In advance of a Trump 2.0, when we're talking about the president having a direct role in setting interest rates, we remember the tweeting at Jay Powell. What do Republicans like Bill Hagerty want to see in another Trump term if there is one?
So I think a lot of the Republicans from Capitol Hill still want to keep that Fed independence because, remember, any major change with the Fed, it's going to have to start with a bill coming out of Capitol Hill. And I always remind this to clients, it's 3 separate but equal. You ask any person in Congress, are you 3 separate but equal? They'll say, absolutely. Yeah. Congress is on equal footing with the president.
Sure.
So you do see this rhetoric coming out of President Trump. Now, remember, President Trump will be able to pick his own leadership if he wins. Jerome Powell and Vice Chairman Mike Barr, for example, their terms end in 2025 and 2026. So obviously that will change. There'll be influence there. But, when it comes to the actual operations of the Fed in terms of will the president have a more direct role in directing the Fed to do certain things, it's going to be like Trump 1.0, where a lot of tweets and
Sure.
a lot of trying to just push the narrative a certain way, but without having that absolute
It's just up
direct
to the
control.
chairman to tune it out in that world.
Exactly.
Jay Powell had some practice with that. Kevin Cramer, senator, was asking about the timing of rate changes, cuts or hikes, suggesting that it would be a bad look, a bad perception, I think the words he used, to move interest rates in September? Are we going to just have to carve out the entire election year at some point?
So, I really defer to our rate strategist, Ira Jersey, on the rate stuff, but I will say is the Fed does not want to be seen playing politics.
They don't, no.
So I can't give you a prediction on when or won't they
They
cut
also
rates.
have to do
but-
their job when they need to do it.
Exactly.
Like, where's the balance on that?
But, as you know, everything in Washington is also a political decision. And
Mm-hmm.
so despite the fact that the Fed is only about, I think it's 1.5 miles down the road on Constitution Avenue from Capitol Hill and even closer to the White House.
Indeed.
Jerome Powell was always going to keep that in mind because, the Fed does not want to be the one seen as tilting the election one way or another,
Mm-hmm.
which is also why we would very unlikely ever see any major rulemaking happen
Sure,
in
right.
September or October or November.
So you've got a September and a November here, right? November, I guess, is off the table, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to you in a while. I haven't talked to you about Joe Biden. I don't think I've talked to you since the debate. And I have to pull you into this,
Yep.
if only by way of your relationship with our audience. Not just our viewers and listeners, but terminal users who reach out, as you've heard and seen in these conversations, to Nathan for their thoughts. And I'm always curious what they're asking about. And it sure seemed like, at least over the weekend, it might feel a little different today while we wait for House Democrats to make their next move, that something big was going to happen, that there was going to be a shakeup in this race. And I wonder if that was provoking investment decisions as recently as yesterday or today.
Yeah, so the question obviously is President Biden going to stay in the race?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, if you go to the election monitor that they have on the terminal and they bring in all the predicted and the trader information, you could see that almost instantaneously in the debate go from...
Before the debate was even over.
Yeah, before the debate was even over, it was like 60 to 35, doesn't have to add to 100% in terms in favor of Trump. Now, as that has gone on over through the weekend, a lot of the traders are now moving towards Kamala Harris being the next one to actually get that nomination. However, just within the last day or so, President Biden, especially with the defiance statements that he put out yesterday, I would just say that the narrative is slowly shifting back to President Biden being able to...
Pretty interesting, isn't it?
yeah.
How quickly this can move back and forth.
Exactly. But that's what we tell our clients all the time is, look, we're 4 months out before the election. That could be a year. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen between now and the election. You've got the conventions kicking off next week. You've got a lot of other things that can happen.
yeah.
And so I think just the narrative until President Biden is nominated either via the convention or via the virtual one in order to get him on the Ohio ballot.
Yeah, yeah.
Until that happens, that uncertainty is going to always be there.
It's interesting. That's still out there. A Bloomberg story. July 21, I think, is that virtual meeting when they could lock this up for Joe Biden a little bit differently than they would in Chicago. But fascinating. I'm assuming that a Veep announcement from Donald Trump or the convention itself next week is not a market-moving event.
No, I mean, I think what people are going to look for next week is, the President Trump put out the RNC agenda yesterday,
Yeah.
right? And it was very much a scaled-down version compared to other agendas.
Sure
I mean,
was.
every Republican agenda for the last 12 years has included Glass-Steagall, the separation of investment and commercial banking. Now, this was actually much more scaled down. Now, I don't think markets are ever paying attention to those agendas, but markets want to be comfortable and get more information on what a Trump 2.0 presidency would look like. And if you begin to see a lot more rhetoric coming out of the convention in terms of China and tariffs, I think markets are going to get a little concerned because it's the macro level impact where the presidency has all the power, tariffs, national security, and so forth, that I think the markets are focused on initially. It's the policy stuff for companies that comes a little bit later.
We'll see how cutting red tape works against the idea of raising tariffs when they're all in the room next week. It's great to have you back, Nathan Dean. Hope it's been a great summer with the family. Stay close to us, as always, at Bloomberg Intelligence. He is our lifeline outside of the Bureau. Well, there's more than that, too.